and I, whoops. Okay, tonight, the other congregation I belong to, Shira Me, has a study session from 7:30 to 8:30. From 8:30 to 9 something, I'm going to show Rabbi Soloveitchik's Purim video, which is about 30 some minutes long, that has to do with another Orthodox / modern Orthodox, however you look at it, but a view of the Book of Esther and Purim. So anyone who wants to can send me an email, and I'll send them the links to get on. My email is stanpacbell, PACBELL, @gmail.com.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for that. All right, let's jump into our learning. There's two things that I want to try to accomplish today. Now that I say three things, that one we've already accomplished, the discussion about the fast today, Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther, and fast in general. Two, we're going to take a quick look at a couple passages from the book of Leviticus, which is our Torah portion this week. And three, God willing, if we have time, it is also Shabbat Zahor, the special Shabbat before Purim, and we're going to take a look at something regarding Amalek and Haman. So if we have the time, those are the three things we're going to do. Let's jump in with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, asok b'divrei Torah. All right, share my screen with all of you. And we're going to start with Vayikra with Leviticus. So let me just make sure that I can see all of you on my screen. Okay. Everybody can see it, right? Vayikra Moshe ve'daber Adonai alav me'ohel moed le'mor. So God calls to Moses, and God speaks to him from the tent of meeting, saying, okay, actually I should correct this.
Yeah.
This Aleph I should make a little bit smaller, like that, because that's actually the way it looks in the Torah. So anything that you notice in that verse, just very quickly, Vayikra el Moshe ve'adaber Adonai alav me'ohel moed le'mor. Yes, George.
Small olive, of course.
Okay, yes.
Anything out of the ordinary, there should be a reason, either a small or a big or something.
Okay, so there's a small aleph. The way it's written in the Torah, it's very tiny. And there's a few different places in the Torah where letters are written in an unusual fashion. And that leads our sages to ask the question, what does it mean that the aleph is small? And the most common explanation that's given is Moses, through an act of humility, didn't want to write down, God called to me. That's what it means, Vayikra. God called to Moses. So Moses, out of humility, doesn't have the aleph in there at all. It just says Vayikar el Moshe, which means it just so happened that God ran into Moses and began to speak to him. He didn't call out to him. Well, God was upset with that and said, no, Moses, I am calling out to you. So in compromise for Moses's humble perspective and God's insistence that God wanted to show this specialness of Moses, it became a small aleph. But what's interesting is it's an unusual expression in the Torah. You usually have Vayedaber Adonai Moshe le'mor, and God spoke to Moses. And here you have Vayikra el Moshe. Why is God calling to Moses in the first place? Why isn't it the usual Vayedaber Adonai Moshe le'mor? And God spoke to Moses saying. And that also triggers the opportunity for the rabbis to say, how is this time different than all the other times that God spoke to Moses? And that's going to what is going to drive this first comment. But we're actually going to be looking at two comments at the same time that both take it from slightly different angles. Because we know that, well, we don't know anything, but we do know something. We know, how did last week's Torah portion end? Last week's Torah portion ended Pikudei, with God dwelling in the Mishkan and not allowing Moshe or anybody to be present while God's presence first comes in. Then God allows Moses and others to come into the tabernacle. And we're going to see that here in the commentary by Rabbi Simcha Bunim. He says, why is it here, as nowhere else in the Torah, that we find a call, Vayikra el Moshe, preceding God's speech, Dibor? Why doesn't it just say, Vaydaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed? Why do we need this extra parenthetical statement to explain it? And he says, the reason is that the previous Parsha, Pikudei, ended with the words, Moses could not enter into the tent of the meeting because the cloud had settled upon it. Right? And we learn in the Torah, when the cloud is there, nobody can enter. When the cloud has lifted, that's when people could enter. So because the cloud was there, Moses didn't enter. So now God has to call to Moses to say, Moses, come back, you can enter. You could enter. And that is the reason for that additional Vayikra el Moshe. Okay. On its surface, does this do anything for us? What does this comment generate? What is behind Rabbi Simcha Bunim? What might he be saying here from an emotional or psychological perspective? If you are Moses, Leora.
I think as though God, excuse me, God may be upset with Moses, not letting him come into the tent. Now that he says you can come in, it shows that we do need to find a place to calm down and try again.
Very nice. Okay, so it may be that Moses may be misunderstanding God when God said to him, you're not allowed to come into my presence. And remember, this is the same God who has spent 40 days with Moshe on the mountain speaking to Moses face to face. So Moses might be thinking, as Leora said, uh-oh, is there a strain in my relationship with God? Did I do something wrong? And so God has to call him and say, no, everything's good, Moshe. Don't worry. We're friends. Come back. I mean, I say that colloquially. We're friends. You understand what it is that I'm saying. And if we take Leora's comments and expand it, right? Think about your relationships with people. Sometimes you may be in a situation with somebody that you love, somebody that you have a close relationship with, and something created distance. And what do you need to do in the space of that distance? Reach out to that individual and draw them back in. Call them back, right? We have a tendency sometimes to say, well, I'm not picking up the phone. That person should pick up the phone first. Well, they were the ones, and I'm not going to do it, right? And here, God is the one who reaches out in order to teach us that lesson, that we should be the ones to reach out if we suspect that people are harboring discomfort around the relationship. Right? Leora, great. Thank you. Jack.
This may be pedantic, but how do we know
I sometimes like pedantic.
Okay, how do we know that he refers to God? it says he called to Moses, and then God spoke to him. You've got like a pronoun issue going on.
Yeah, who else would it be? I guess is the question. In the context of what is going to happen next with instructions by God about the sacrificial system, and prior to it, you have to assume that it is God who's calling.
I mean,
Occasionally,
I guess what I'm raising is it is similar to the point you raised, is that, why doesn't it say God called to Moses? Why does it use he?
yeah, I mean, it doesn't say he in the Hebrew text, because in the Hebrew text, the verb doesn't need a pronoun attached to it. The Hebrew verb vayikra literally means one called, he called, God called.
Does it necessarily mean God called?
It doesn't necessarily mean God called, but you would have to read it in the context of what came before and what comes afterwards to determine the pronoun. It's not as mysterious as there's, other examples in the Torah where you really don't know who's speaking to who. When Jacob is wrestling with the angel in that dialogue,
Right.
it's very unclear. And when Moses is coming back with Zipporah to Egypt, and there's that strange moment where an angel needs to do a circumcision, and Zipporah does the circumcision of Moses's children. There, it's very unclear who's speaking to who. Here, if you read in the context of the Torah, it's fairly obvious that it's got to be God speaking. So, Stan.
I think that this illustrates that the meaningful question we can always ask is, why was the Torah written the way it was? The saying, did it happen, is a meaningless question. But why it was written in the way that it is a question that we can all deal with. And that's how a lot of this Torah discussion is.
For sure. I mean, that's exactly what the rabbis are doing. The rabbis are wondering, why was the Torah written this way? And using that as an opportunity to explore and do midrash. That's what Rabbi Simcha is doing here. Rabbi David ben Shmuel Halevi has a different take. He says, Rashi comments on this verse. Why are there paragraph and section breaks throughout the Torah? In general, do you know what he means when he says section breaks and paragraph breaks? Do you know what he's talking about? Here, I'm going to hold up my Chumash. Do you see that little thing right there? So when you open up a Chumash, you will see sometimes, and here's another one right there. There's a little samach and a little pei. And written throughout the Chumash, there's samach and pei, which means sections are either open or closed. There may be breaks between them. And so Rashi is commenting on, why is there a section break in this piece of the Torah that we're reading right now in Vayikra? And the answer that Rabbi David ben Shmuel Halevi gives is to give Moses some space in which to reflect on and investigate one parsha before moving on to the next, and between one matter and the other. Surely it would have been possible for the Blessed Holy One to inspire such knowledge and wisdom in Moses that he would be able to reflect and investigate what he was taught even without breaks. Instead, this lesson comes to teach us proper behavior. No one should rely on their sharp-mindedness to say, I am incisive and I learn things quickly and easily. Indeed, many failures and mistakes will come about because of hurriedness. According to the quickness of one's reasoning are the mistakes thereof. We should learn from Moses then to pause and take a break in our study between one matter and the next. All right, are you following this, or do you need me to tease it out? What's happening is there's one of those symbols in this parsha, and Rashi is using that as a way of saying, why did Moses create a break between one Torah portion and the next Torah portion in this manner? And Rabbi David Ben Shmuel is learning an important and valuable lesson of human condition, which is to say that it is in our nature to move from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing and not pause. It is also in our nature to sometimes move very quickly without taking into consideration what we're doing, why we're doing, and how we're doing. And the breaks in the Torah are symbolic of Moshe pausing between moments in order to collect himself so that he can fully be present and understanding in order to be able to move to the next thing that he has to do. In this case, the next writing of the Torah. Does that make sense? It's best explained in the language of Rabbi Slater. He says, the challenge in spiritual life, as in all of life, is balance. This lesson above reminds us of the value in taking a break from the headlong rush forward that characterizes our lives. We are constantly pushed and pulled into the next moment, into the next thought, into the next activity. Spiritual practices can act as a break in that movement. We can remind ourselves through them or be reminded by the practices that there is legitimacy in just being and not doing. In fact, we may do better if we were to pause and sometimes do less. How do you make pauses? Where do you practice those breaks in your life? Rob.
Well, I suppose the most common of breaks is sleep. So we sleep at night. I mean, that's something we have to do, or almost all of us have to do.
Yeah, that's a good one. And Rob and everybody else, when you wake up, how do you wake up? Do you wake up and leap out of bed, throwing yourself, and maybe less today than yesterday or the day before, and I say yesterday in a metaphoric yesterday, not literally yesterday, when your to-do list prior to retirement may have been much greater than it is in retirement. Did we leap out of bed, or did we wake up and pause? Like this morning, I felt fully rested at 6:08 a.m. when I woke up. And I took my time getting out of bed, knowing that I wasn't going to exercise this morning because I'm fasting. I wasn't going to eat breakfast because I'm fasting. I needed to be at Minyan at 8 o'clock. I didn't have to rush my day. And so I began my day with breathing and meditation. Before I even got out of bed, I created a pause in the moment between sleep and action to frame for myself how I was going to step into the world. Right? That's, I think, what's going on here. That's what Rabbi Slater is suggesting we do. So Rob gives us one example. Sleep is that pause. Other examples. So I saw Jack's hand up and then Jackie's hand up.
This class is a pause
Mhm.
between dealing with work issues and the often, prosaic and trivial things that take up our lives. And at least once a week, I have the honor and privilege of learning with this great group and talking about things like this, which is very different than what I do the rest of my life.
What a great answer. Indeed. Thank you for that. Jackie.
One of the things that we do in our work day, right, is to have a break, right? We go on breaks from after working so many hours, you have to take a break. And also with our meals, we do those throughout our day. I had a teacher as an integrative yoga therapist. We were doing an entire module on breath work. And he encouraged us to put little Post-its on each doorway to say breath. And we could also say the mezuzah would do that to take, as you move from one place into another place, you're going literally through a portal, through a door, and to take a breath and set an intention before moving on with the next thing.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. We breathe all the time, but do we breathe with intention? Do we use our breath to allow us to pay attention to where we are at emotionally in any one time? Stan and then Lauren.
We take for granted that this 24-hour day on Earth is just something that happens, but it's part of what we call God's creation, and the 24-hour day. And then the Jews or the Torah then incorporated the week. So that's another cycle within a cycle. And that's, I think, the way Judaism is constructed, based on natural cycles that what they were blessed with.
Great example, Stan, right? We create those human spaces like Shabbat or holidays or things like that, which allow for us to mark time. So one moment doesn't just roll into the next moment, ad infinitum, right? Lauren. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think, it took a while after retirement to get used to those downtimes, because before I retired, as a young mother with young children, there were no downtimes. And when I look back at those times, I wonder, how did I do it all? I mean, where did I find the time to do it all? But now I just find everything I do is like a downtime, because it's things that I want to do. So your class and Musar and Melton classes, and I take a writing class and I play mahjong, or I go to lunch with friends. Maybe it's the reward for all those years of not having downtime. So it's all downtime as far as I'm concerned.
Except okay, so that's fair. But even in the downtime that you have, because your time is no longer dictated by other responsibilities like parenting, like work. That still doesn't do away with the spiritual practices at any stage in our life that Rabbi Slater is suggesting we engage in to allow us, right, to do whatever we do in a better manner. Now,
if you ever played mahjong, it's very spiritual.
we can decide what better looks like. Better might mean, how am I going to approach conversation in this space? How am I going to deal with my relationships, right? Any pause that we do allows us to frame whatever we're about to engage in a more thoughtful manner. Whatever it is that we're engaged in
Well,
that.
I do take some of the lessons from some of these classes and some of these topics, and I do bring them up at lunch.
Yeah,
and
no, I
do-
wasn't speaking about
Oh.
you personally
Oh.
just now. I was just talking in general,
But
whatever.
I'm just saying what I find is right. But it's like I love the fact that I take all these classes because it makes my conversations much more interesting,
Yeah,
personally.
great.
especially our Musar classes.
Leora.
Sorry. It brings a smile to my face because growing up in Israel, I believe it was always in the summer. I don't remember it in the winter, but between 2 and 4, the stores would close.
Mhm.
So you have to break because there's nothing to do there. You can't.
Yeah,
anything.
in Israel, in Europe,
Yes.
lots of places in the Mideast, there's lots of places in this world where that afternoon siesta is essential to the ability to then go back and, be more productive. We have mincha, right? Jews have mincha, the afternoon service, as a pause in order to allow us to focus more critically on what it is that we're going to do. So let's go back to Rabbi Slater and see how he finishes this. But we have to be very careful at the same time not to be led to thinking that we can't do anything or that we shouldn't. The whole earth is filled. Okay, so we need to pause, but our pause shouldn't move us to being stuck. And he's now going to relate to the first comment. The whole earth is filled with God's glory, just like the Mishkan, and we might come to think, who am I to do anything to change the world, to impose my will on what is? We are called Vayikra in every moment, just like Moses, to come into the Mishkan, to step into the world, to engage in life. In other words, what he's saying, Rabbi Slater, is God needed to call to Moses because Moses may have forgotten in his pause that he has a responsibility. Pause is essential in order to refashion and refocus what it is that you need to do, but you need to go back. And maybe Moses wasn't ready to go back. So God had to call him to remind him of his responsibility. The challenge is to draw energy from the pause, to experience the break in forward movement as an opportunity to listen to our deepest intentions, our truest yearning, and our desire for God to better hear what we are being called to do. In response to deep listening, we may yet hear God's voice call to us, and our passionate, warm, enthusiastic response may make us a conduit for the appearance of divine light in all life. So beautiful, isn't it? I mean, to think, right, that in our pause, and Jackie, I see your hand, I'll call you in a second. In our pause, we take that momentary breath in order to realign our listening. Shema Yisrael. Listen, O Israel, to the call of God. What is God calling me to do right now in this moment? And let me gear up for that. And that's why it says Vayikra, right? God called to Moses because God wanted to remind Moses that his obligations and his responsibilities never end, even in the pause. Jackie.
Yeah, as soon as you started talking, I'm like, I can't believe I missed that one. Was that? So pausing with prayer as well as with meditation. I've heard it said once that prayer is you talking, meditation is you listening to God.
I like that. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. So there's questions for you to ruminate on. I'm going to read you the questions. Well, the last comment that he makes, Rabbi Slater, we are called in every moment, just like Moses, to come into the Mishkan, to step into the world, to engage in life. So, what are the clouds that you perceive that keep you from coming closer to God? Right? What are the clouds in your life that keep you from coming closer to God? For some people, it may be the loss that I've never been able to get over, and I still blame God for it. For others, it may be moments in my life that didn't go the way I wanted them to go, and I'm holding God responsible. I don't know. What are the clouds? For others, it may be, who am I to think that I could accomplish this? I don't have the capabilities. I don't have the strength. I don't have the knowledge. Right? What are those clouds? Second question, when do you sense that the world is too full for you to fit in? Where you need to pause, you need to pull back, you need to separate yourself. What do you sense is too wonderful, too amazing, too awesome for you to merit attaining, tasting, entering, right? When does the cloud's glory push you away, scare you? What might you need to be able to hear the call from God inviting you in? Have you ever been tripped up by being too quick in your assessment of a situation, in your response to a problem or a question? Right? Have you ever jumped to the conclusion? Have you ever assumed something and not taken the proper pause to assess a situation? Have you developed any techniques or practices that help you to take breaks, to pause between matters so that you can truly assess and understand who you are in the moment and what your appropriate response should be? So these are your questions of spiritual practice to ruminate on in the hours and days ahead. Now we're going to switch our conversation, and we're going to move from Vayikra to the special Torah portion that we read tomorrow, reminding us that Purim is around the corner, Shabbat Zachor. And we read from Deuteronomy 25:17. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, how he surprised you on the march, cutting down all the stragglers in your rear. When you were famished and weary, he did not fear God. Therefore, when Adonai your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that Adonai your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. That's the command to remember. So what do you see in this text, just in Deuteronomy? What strikes you? Stan?
Well, one of them was the irony. Do you have to remember not to remember?
Yeah. Yes. That's good. They do not, right? You shall blot out the memory. In other words, forget, do everything you can to destroy the memory of Amalek, but then do not forget to do that. Good. Okay, that paradoxical nature of the text. What else do you see in this text? Anything else? Yeah, Leora.
It obviously it's relating to what happened October 7th, but it's really telling us never sleep. You know, keep one eye open because you don't know what your enemy is about to do.
Good. So one of the things it's saying is that in every generation, there are going to be those, as we say in the Passover Seder, who wish to destroy us, who wish to kill us, and who look for those areas in which we are weak and unprotected and unsecured. And that's where they're going to attack. They're going to attack our enemies when our awareness is at its lowest point, which means we should never not be aware, ever. Good. Jack.
I think I'm just kind of a little different approach. That I'm trying to harmonize the contradiction that Stan raised. You're supposed to forget and remember. And I wonder if it's saying that remember what Amalek did to you. In other words, don't remember Amalek.
Mm,
Remember what happened to you
mm,
and what the impact of that, because then it says later that you're eventually going to be a place where God's going to make you safe. And so you shouldn't remember Amalek because God's going to make you safe. And what you really need to remember is perhaps the impact of what Amalek did to you. And so, and how that perhaps, does that mean that you live in total paranoia? And is that a good thing? Or does it mean that the crushing, horrific thing that Amalek did to you, you have to remember that and remember all of the people that were lost? I guess what I'm suggesting is that perhaps it's not as simple as saying, remember what Amalek did and you should be forever vigilant. I'm not sure it says that. It says that God's going to make you safe and then forget about Amalek. Don't
that's
be
really,
prisoner of the horror.
that's really nice, Jack. When you were talking, it made me think, like, what specifically are we remembering of the attack? We're remembering that there were weak and stragglers in the first place that were vulnerable. And maybe as a community, we should never allow for there to be weak stragglers, to be vulnerable. Because we're going to be safe, but that doesn't mean that as a community, we equally take care of everybody. And maybe the remembering here is the lessons that that moment of pain caused us. In the same way, October 7th, right? We're going to remember that we can never rely simply on certain things to believe that we're safe. We're going to remember that a country divided is a country that's weak in the eyes of our enemy. We're going to remember how we felt in the moment of the attack to make sure we don't put ourselves, whether the dangers are external or internal, to get to that place again. Very nice. Oh, I see a lot of hands. Jackie was first, then George, then Stan.
It's okay. I was just gonna play off what Jack was saying, and I've already spoken to that before.
Okay, George.
Yeah, several things. It's not meant. Well, safety is conditional, okay? That you obey the laws. If you don't, bad things can happen. We've seen that in the Torah. But also another point is it says those who don't fear God.
Mm.
It's a very important thing. Although some people pretend to be religious and, that's even worse, to murder in the name of some God.
I love the definition that I use of what it means to fear God.
Yeah.
Is the definition that I learned from my teacher, Rabbi Ira Stone, who learned from his teacher of philosophy indirectly from the writings, Emmanuel Levinas. To fear God is to be overwhelmed by the awesome responsibility
is
that
what means it. It's more in awe of in Hebrew,
to fear God is to be overwhelmed by the awesome, infinite responsibility we have to serving the other. That's the fear of God. So for somebody or some nation that doesn't fear God, like Amalek, is to be totally blinded to the responsibility they as a people have to other peoples. Even in war, right, there is a responsibility to how to treat those who you are not in war with. So Israel right now is getting a lot of very unfortunate negative press in the world by people claiming they're committing a genocide in Gaza, that they're not taking into consideration the innocents. Question whether there are innocents or not, that's a different story. But, you know, I'm sure there are. But here, to fear God
Mhm.
is to behave in a manner that even with your enemy, how do you behave in the face of war so that you are responsible for those others?
Mm.
That is the extreme by which we take seriously. And what George is pointing out is Amalek didn't. They didn't care. For them, the fear, no fear of God was we can do anything we want.
Yeah.
For Hamas, the way they acted is such brutality, right? No fear of God, no understanding of the responsibility that they have to another human being. Stan.
I'm struck with the difference between remembering and forgetting in my younger days, the 30s, 40s, 50s, and in today's world with the internet and social media and everything that we're bombarded with. You know, how do we look at it's so different for me, for instance, in my generation, to think about all these things in a totally different way than I did, and will nobody ever do it again. You know, the internet and this world isn't going to go away. The world has changed.
For sure. It's harder nowadays to forget anything because you're constantly reminded. No matter what you did, whenever you did it, there is somebody who's going to remind you and some evidence to show you that you did it, and there is no forgetting. It's true. Jackie.
Okay, so I was trying not to say anything more. Okay, so as someone who has survived abuse, complex PTSD from relational abuse that went on over decades, in the spiritual community that I'm in, there's a lot of times people will say, well, weren't they your greatest teacher? And there's this thing that comes in where you're like, yeah, but I'm just going to celebrate the fact that they did that horrible thing. And they did it over and over and over again, knowing that it was a bad thing. So instead of remembering and being grateful for a quote unquote teacher who did something awful to us, a bad situation, that's not the point, but rather to remember the lesson that we gleaned from going through that trial, is what I'm hearing. Yes?
Yeah, exactly. Trauma.
Anymore, or in an individual life, or, you know, etc.
Exactly. To relive the trauma over and over again, and to believe that the trauma is going to happen to us in any moment does not allow for healing. That's what I'm hearing from you and from Jack earlier. Rather, what lessons do I take from the trauma that allows me to be more sensitive to me and others in the moment? And how do I assure that others may not experience the trauma that I may have experienced?
And it's also why you can't actually do the healing while you're still in the situation.
No.
You have to get out into a safe space before the healing.
For sure. Can't.
That break, that pause.
For sure. That's why you need the pause.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kedushat Halevi, he suggests the following. Remember what, etc. You were famished and weary and cut down, etc. It seems, he says, that it is not only for this that the seed of Israel is being commanded regarding the erasing of Amalek, which is the seed of Esau. Rather, every person in Israel needs to erase the evil part that is concealed in one's heart, that is known by the name of Amalek. So the Kedushat Halevi does something rather remarkable. He suggests that Amalek isn't an external enemy, it's an internal enemy. That there's an Amalek within each one of us. There's a part of us that doesn't fear God. there is a part of us that would do trauma to ourselves and potentially to others that we need to be aware of and not let go of. And this is because whenever the seed of Amalek is found in the world, it is found in the human being, since the human is a small world, and therefore there is a reality to Amalek, to the force of evil inside every human being, which arises every time to make a human being sin. And is regarding this that the remembrance comes in the Torah. So again, Kedushat Levi is saying, don't look for the external Amalek that might exist. Hamas, Hitler, Haman. Why do they all start with H? That's interesting. But rather, look for the potential of Amalek in you when you don't live your life fearing God. When you don't live your life thinking about the awesome responsibility you have to every other human being. That's where sin happens. And behold, the strength of the seed of Israel is only found in the mouth, since the voice is the voice of Yaakov, found in the Torah study and in prayer, when a person has this force always burning within towards the Holy One of blessing. Then no evil can control him. So how do we balance the Amalek's voice within? We balance it through Torah, prayer, community, all of the things that we do to remind us, right, that we have obligations and responsibilities to other. Skip down to the end because we're running out of time. This is why you were famished and weary, is written, that you did not have inside you the force of the seed of Israel, that their hands were weakened and did not serve God and did not fear God. From this, you need to remember strongly so that the force of Amalek will not make you stumble. This is why it is written, and it was when God raised his, actually forget about that last part. So how do we contend with not forgetting and remembering all at the same time? We remember the potential for us to do evil to ourselves and to other people. That's remembering Amalek. Not forgetting is not forgetting that we have the resources through community, through Torah, through study, through prayer, through our relationship to God, to not succumb to the Amalek that is within. That's how that paradox works. What do you think about that? Without those things, without God, community, Torah, prayer, it is easier to succumb, right, to selfish, ego-driven behaviors that only focus on my immediate needs. By taking all of those other things, God, Torah, prayer, and whatever else, that balances, right, the ego that may drive me. Right? That's what he's saying. So a little bit of Zachor in preparation for Purim, a little bit of Torah in what the book of Vayikra is teaching us. Hopefully lots of spiritual lessons for all of you. Pause so that you can hear God's call. Take advantage of the gifts that our tradition give us to create balance in our lives. And remember our obligation to serve others as an antidote to the selfish desire to serve self. I wish all of you a Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
A Chag Purim Sameach. Hopefully we will see you Saturday night at our spiel, at our Megillah reading, Sunday morning at Minyan when we read the Megillah again, at the Purim Carnival. And before you know it, you'll have to finish your Hamantashen because you're going to be cleaning for Pesach.
Thank you, Rabbi. Wonderful class. Thank you.
All right, all. A good day to all of you. Take care.